I don't know if you all heard about this, but Bernie Sanders actually had an interview with the Washington Post the other day. And it was a great interview, and I strongly encourage you all to watch the entire thing. But we're going to cover one particular part of that interview because it was absolutely hilarious. Couldn't believe he said it, but it's pretty demonstrative of just how much Bernie has kind of just stopped giving a fuck about the establishment. Not gonna lie. He's kind of reached that point where he's like, look, this is my last run. I need to make it count. I need to show the real Bernie Sanders, for better or for worse, and just be as authentic as the man that the people fell in love with in 2015 and before that to begin with. So I want to play you all the clip because it is absolutely hilarious. Give me a second. Let me pull it up.
Let's stick with that race point you just brought up. In 1974, you said that busing policies were well-meaning in theory, but sometimes result in, quote, racial hostility.
What else did I say in there?
Tell me.
No, you got it there. Read it. Read the whole quote.
I don't have the whole quote.
The whole quote is, the federal government doesn't give a shit about African Americans.
Oh, that is true.
Yeah. Usually when Bernie says, well, can you read the whole quote, please? It's usually some like wholesome, feel good like message where the original quote gets taken out of context. So he always asks to clarify because it's, you know why they do that. They trying to then they were trying to liken him to Biden, right? That's because that's the argument, or one of the arguments that Joe Biden used to push to push basically to continue busing segregation. Bernie won't have none of that. He was like, nah, you need to say the whole quote. And boy, when I tell you, I was like, oh, whoa, wait a minute. Whoa, what just happened? Hold up. I'm gonna play that quote one more time. I'm gonna play that video one more time for those of you who didn't hear it.
Let's stick with that race point you just brought up. In 1974, you said that busing policies were well-meaning in theory, but sometimes result in, quote, racial hostility.
What else did I say in there?
Tell me.
No, you got it there. Read it. Read the whole quote.
I don't have the whole quote.
The whole quote is, the federal government doesn't give a shit about African Americans.
Oh, that is true.
Bruh, did you see Bernie's face? Did you see all of the fucks just flying out the window when he was like, really? So we're gonna do this game? Okay, you know what? Read the whole quote. I dare you. Go ahead, read it. Because if you don't read it, I'm just gonna say it. And then what's even funnier about that video is that after that part, the interviewer actually says, well, I did have the whole quote. I just didn't want to say that. So basically, you admit to cherry picking, right? You got the audacity to try and pretend as if Bernie was on the side of Biden to a degree. And he wasn't. He was being very realistic because that was a thing back then. Bernie was not being opportunistic. He wasn't playing the game. He was being frank. And that was, if you all remember some of the things that a lot of the people who initially went through segregation went through, some of the traumatic experiences that they went through, then you would understand why Bernie Sanders said that. Growing up in that time period, being in Chicago during the civil rights movement, it's what he was saying was actually true. The difference between he and Biden was that, one, he wasn't trying to use that to push for anti-busing legislation, pro-segregation legislation. Bernie was not working with segregationists, okay, to maintain segregation. That's a big difference, I think. And also his statement afterwards, 100% true. 100% true. And I'm very glad that he said that because I think it really needs to be understood. I hate when people say, well, Lyndon B. Johnson was one of the best things that happened to black people. No, those civil rights amendments were going to be passed. Lyndon B. Johnson was the president. Lyndon B. Johnson just signed something. Lyndon B. Johnson was known by the press as a connoisseur of the N-word. Okay? Lyndon B. Johnson, you think that Trump is bad? when we're talking about issues of race, Lyndon B. Johnson was very, very similar in that regard, because he knew if he passed a policy where it looked like he cared about black people, right, then he could do and say whatever he wanted to behind the scenes, like redlining, right, like allowing for racist credit, like for racist credit loans and credit scores and things like that. And he did it. He took advantage of it. And so what Bernie says is 100% true. The federal people need to stop confusing this, right? Caring about the black vote is not the same thing as caring about black people. The federal government, most oftentimes, does care about the black vote. And if you've noticed the pattern in history, most often they care about the black vote in the first term, or the first election, the first term, the second election, and in the last 4 years of their presidency, including Obama's. They don't care. Obama didn't do a damn thing for black people. Good God. Right? But this is a consistent pattern that I'm glad Bernie Sanders brought up, because oftentimes people think that, Candace Owens saying, oh, get off the plantation. Okay, so what, Candace? You want me to stop being a house slave to come join you outside in the fields? That's basically what you're asking me to do by joining the Republican Party, who she very rarely, if ever, wants to call out. And then you have the Kamalas of the world, who want us to forget everything that she's done to cause pain to the black community, setting the record for putting black men in jail in California, keeping innocent men in jail on a regular basis, using just these ridiculous tactics, saying, oh, paperwork wasn't filed early enough. Oh, we need slave labor. Things like that. Why would anyone think that it is in the best interest of the federal government to regularly represent 13% of the population? We're probably more than that, so I've read, but why would it be in the best interest of the federal government to represent 13% of the population? And the fact of the matter is, it is not in the best interest of the federal government to represent 13% of the population. At the end of the day, they're going to represent the people that they have the most similar experiences of. And that's not, it's hard for some people to hear it, but those are the facts nonetheless. So what Bernie Sanders said, once again, is 100% true. Is that saying everybody in the federal government is racist? No, but I'm saying that most of the federal government has been complicit in racist policy because it does not affect them or their family. Right? Obviously, Obama is not a bleeding racist, but what he allowed to happen to the Native American people, for example, in Standing Rock, that was a racist policy. It was racist behavior, and the only reason that they were able to denigrate the Native American people in the way that they did, the only reason they were able to harm them with absolutely no repercussion, in fact, they were coddled, even praised by some officials. The reason, like Trump, by the way, the reason they were able to get away with that was because why? The Native American people do not have significant representation, and unfortunately are in states that oftentimes cannot affect the outcome of a federal election, and therefore the federal government does not give a damn about them. How much can a black community affect the outcome of an election, a general election for the presidency? Think about that. We can do a lot of damage in the Democratic primary election. You absolutely need every single vote you can get from the black community. But when you combine the fact that we're only 13% of the population, with the fact that half of us, or the majority of us, I would even say, are actually concentrated in states that the Democrats can't win, then the rest of us are in metropolitan states that were going to be blue anyway. Every black person in New York, the state, could vote against the Democrat, and the Democrats would still win. Every black person in California, actually, I don't know about that because the Bay Area has a lot of black people. But just off of pure numbers, there are much more Asians and white people. Every black person in California voted against the Democrat. What the Democrats will still win. So what incentive after they get elected does the federal government have, or the federal officials have, to continue to represent the black people after they get in office? So there is that constant struggle where some people are hyper focused on black issues, as they should be. Why? Because, like I said the other day, people always want to point to classism. They say, oh, ID politics is divisive. ID politics can be divisive. And by the way, it is not only divisive whenever you see the left weaponizing it, but as you just saw, Trump weaponized ID politics, or identity politics, for those of you who don't know. The last, just in those tweets a few days ago. So the right is just as guilty as trying to legitimately weaponize ID politics. But at the end of the day, you can point to classism and say, well, it's really about classism. It's us versus them. That sounds good. So what are the weapons of classism? Racism, sexism, bigotry, xenophobia, misinformation and disinformation, turning us against our fellow brothers and sisters that may look different, may speak different, practice a different religion than we do. Those are the weapons of classism. Like I said the other day when I was doing my Elizabeth Warren video, I said people always want to complain when you want to talk about, well, it's racism is not the biggest problem, it's classism. Okay, question for you. Once again, your car is broken down, right? You got a lot of different parts to your car. Some parts to the vehicle. You like a tail light. The vehicle is still operational, right? You can still get through the day with the broken tail light. Unless you're black in the South, then you might get beaten up and arrested and thrown in jail and have some marijuana planted on you and potentially be choked out. But that's a different discussion for a different day. But let's just say you're a white woman driving through the South and it's only a tail light. You're good to go. So if that's the case, you're all good. But what happens if your engine breaks down and your tire's busted? So say classism is the engine, your tire is racism. Yeah, racism is a big deal, but the engine makes my car go, so we got to fix that, and we're all good. Because that's how some people think. Except for if you fix that, you're not going anywhere unless you fix your tire. You're not going anywhere unless your alternator works. You're not going anywhere if you got sugar in your tank, okay? And your gas don't, and your car don't move. In other words, yeah, you can fix the engine, which would be classism. You can address that. But if you think this country is going to progress without acknowledging all the issues and all of the ways that we are turned against each other, in order to remain oppressed, right? Because we get so focused on demonizing someone else, demonizing someone else's experiences, demonizing someone else's struggles. Until you identify all the ways that we are turned against each other, then your car will never move. Hey, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification button to get all of our notifications if you like that episode of Mikasa Sukasa. You can also help continue to grow our show by donating to our Patreon and helping us hit our goal of 500 patrons. But remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace.